My childhood was pretty problematic. My parents split up, and I think my mom blamed me for a lot of that, even though I was 5 months old. And so growing up, I had this weird complex of thinking my mom and I were best friends, but also being afraid of her. And I think a lot of that was if I thought we were friends, I wouldn't tell anybody what was happening. I lived with her from the time I was born until the time I was 16, on and off. I've lived in almost every state in Appalachia: West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, and then I've traveled extensively. In moving, I was able to fall in love with the region that I live in, which before, when I'd only lived in Pike County, I definitely don't think that I felt that love and appreciation for this region. I thought if there's a problem, it's a Kentucky problem, like clean water or our roads not being taken care of. I was like, oh, this is a Kentucky thing. Then I moved to Tennessee and faced the same thing, and then Virginia and the same thing there. And I learned that it's not a Kentucky problem and it's not an Appalachian problem, but it's a national problem. By the time I was 3, I had a little sister. She's very much what got me through my childhood. I remember her being 2 and 3 years old, and I was so fixated that she was my baby. I wanted to give her like her bottles and change her diapers and take care of her, and I acted like I was the one that gave birth to this child, and was like very attached from like the day that like she came home. And I think a lot of that is the reason my sister and I were able to get free. My maternal grandmother was very, very rooted in her indigenous heritage. One of the things that she would do was take me and my sister to state parks and would explain like what moss is and like what these trees are, but like explain them in very understandable ways for a 6-year-old. She's the first person that ever told me that moss grows on the right side of the tree or the north side of the tree. One of like the biggest things I remember about her is that she had a pet raccoon that lived in the house. And so there was a chocolate lab, a Maine Coon cat, and a raccoon in the house. And she always like talked to the raccoon, and like his name was Bandit. And there are so many Polaroids that we found after she passed of Bandit. Bandit on the chocolate lab, whose name was Coco. Bandit would ride Coco around the house. It was so funny, and that's one of the biggest things I remember. And when she passed away, the raccoon, he grieved himself to death.
Is this what you imagined when you said that I'd be free? Is this what you wanted? Because of you I can barely breathe. I'm in my own head, I'm close to dead. If you don't leave, then you'll regret sticking around. Don't make a sound, I'm a panic attack. Alright y'all, I have a single coming out in 2 days. My album comes out.
When I lived in Tennessee, my 6th grade year, I met this girl, and we were really good friends. And I remember thinking that she was like prettier than all the other girls in our class. And like, I never really understood like why I thought she was so pretty. And so I started talking to her, and after a couple of weeks talking to her, we kissed, and I was so in awe. And so we started dating, and I came home and I was like so excited that I had a girlfriend. And I told my mom, and I remember that we were like driving on this back road, and I was like, Mom, I think I'm a lesbian. She just kind of looked at me, and she was like, yeah. And that was like it. And so I ended up like Me and that girl didn't work out. I was in 7th grade, of course it didn't. But I was like, that right there gave me that security to be like, I can tell my mom anything, because I just told her something major and she didn't really react. So fast forward to my 9th grade year, I moved back to Kentucky. And so I had just started high school, and being in high school, I was exposed to like a lot more LGBT diversity than I was in other places, especially in middle school. And so I kind of thought, oh, maybe I'm genderqueer. And so I talked to my friends about it a little bit, and I picked out the name Oliver that I wanted to go by. And so I came home and I told my mom, and she just was like, that's stupid. That's ridiculous. So I ended up going back in the closet after like a month. And like my hair was super long and I was like hyper feminine. And you know, like I dated like straight cis men, boys. And then around the end of my junior year, I was like, this is bullshit. And the beginning of my senior year, like within the first month, I came out as trans, and I originally came out as non-binary, and had decided that I wanted to go by the name Nolan, but decided that he, him were the pronouns I wanted to go by. And I went by he, him, and I went by Nolan for about a year. And it felt right for a while, and I started a GSA in my high school. I joined a couple of organizations that are fighting for young people, and I started doing a lot of that work. And then I was at a summer camp, and we had this caucus, or this autonomous space for trans and non-binary folk, and I kind of talked about a lot of the reason that I came out with he, him pronouns, and I came out that second time was because it was easier for people to understand. And so it wasn't really how I identified, but it was a lot easier for people in my high school to understand. And I had just graduated, and somebody asked me why I still identified with that, if that's not how I truly identified. And so I went back in and like changed my name tag and put they, them on it, and like wore a non-binary flag the rest of the day, and kind of came back home and made a post and came back out and was like, no, I'm non-binary and I identify with they, them pronouns. And for the most part it was received well. My mom particularly didn't accept it in the ways that I had hoped. I had to move out from living with her, and so I moved to Floyd County, which is where I live now. And I quit talking to her from the 13th of September until the 23rd of December. And while that doesn't sound like a long time, it felt like a long time. And it was my choice to do that, but also primarily it was for safety, because that's the hard part about coming out at all, is it jeopardizes a lot. And I don't think I really understood how serious my mom was about resenting me for coming out. My grandparents were one of my biggest oppressors, and were definitely people that I knew I could never really come out to. When they passed away, they had actually disowned me a couple years before they passed away, so it didn't really affect me a whole lot. I mean, like, I lost my grandparents and I cried a little bit, but like, I guess it would have affected me more if they were in my life, which makes sense, right? Like, you don't really grieve somebody you don't know, usually. But one of the things they were really bothered by is that I took my birth last name off of my Facebook. I mean, they were bothered also by the fact that I was changing my name at all, but it really bothered them that my last name was off of my Facebook. And after they both, because they passed within the same month, one of the first things I did, and I still kind of feel shitty for it, but I also kind of don't. One of the first things I did was take my last name off of Facebook and make my chosen last name my last name on Facebook. That was, as horrible as it sounds, a really liberating moment. Because when they passed, in a really awful, fucked up way, it felt like weight was coming off of my shoulders. I never really was like, oh, I can't wait till my grandparents die or anything like that, because that's awful. But I definitely felt like a little bit of freedom came from that, in that I can post photos of myself with like my hair being cut, and like I can go to Pride and not have to block people from seeing the photos that are posted and have to ask people not to photograph me. And I can, do all of these things that I couldn't do. I can take the name that I want rid of off of my Facebook now, and like there's not going to be repercussions, because my parents don't like it, but my parents don't have much control over me anyway. Not that my grandparents had control over me. I just always felt weirdly guilted to hurt them, even though they hurt me significantly more than I think a Facebook name would have hurt them. I still didn't want to do that to them. I wrote songs for both of their memorials, and I performed them, like I went to both of their memorials. So I wrote 2 different songs for it that I'll never release or do anything with, but they're in a notebook in the back drawer of a dresser in my bedroom. And sometimes I go back and I look at it, and I go back to the day that he called me and told me that my grandmother died, and I always feel so bad again, because like I kind of like sighed that relief, and that's so awful, and I'm always gonna feel awful for that. But at the same time, I feel like it's the equivalent of like someone mentally manipulating your mental state, and then all of a sudden it's gone. I wish I had a relationship with my parents. I see people that have relationships with their parents all the time, and I always feel weird about it, especially when it's queer people and their parents accept them. It's not anger at all. There's a lot of jealousy, and it's something hard to work on when I don't entirely understand why I'm jealous, because it doesn't feel like it bothers me that I don't really have my parents until I see somebody else that does. And then I'm like, yeah, I really want that. I've been in choir since I was in 2nd grade. I remember auditioning. We each had to sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and I was so scared that I hid under the piano while I auditioned for my elementary school choir. And when I got it, we did this concert at the mall in my town. It's like this little mall that like nobody even goes to really. But we did this concert, and after that I was like, I want to be a singer. By the time I was 7, I was singing in church. And I was singing to my grandmother when she passed away, and so I stopped singing for a while. And then I picked it back up around the time I was 10, and I got my piano. I started to teach myself keys, and I remember being like, this is awesome, I can write music now. And I wrote a bunch of like little like silly songs that I would show my mom and my sister and stepdad, and I was like super, super excited about it. I kind of started writing music around the time I was 15, And I wrote music. Some of it was like poems that I had written a long time ago that I put to piano, or I got a ukulele when I was 17, and so I started putting things to ukulele, and I started writing some original stuff. Within about 4 years, I had a full-length album. It was 10 songs. A lot of the focus of it is really deep emotions. It starts out with deep emotions for Appalachia in this region, platonic love, romantic love, betrayal, and I was able to record all of that really recently, and I feel like within the next couple of years to be big enough, hopefully, to be able to do a decent tour, to kind of share all of those emotions with people in a way that everyone can relate to. People only relate to stories so much, but everyone can put their heart in a song. And so that's kind of the goal with this album and with my next upcoming album. It's definitely been stressful, but it's also been an escape. When I got my ukulele and I lived with my mom, I used to go up into the woods on top of the mountain, which was like a 30-minute hike. It was awful. And I would go up to the top of the mountain and I would sit on this like stack of boulders and would just play ukulele. And that's where a lot of the heart and soul of my album comes from, is sitting on those boulders and writing, knowing that I was hiding from something, someone. And some of the songs more about betrayal are about those times that I had to run to escape something that was far bigger than I am, far bigger than I was. Me and my mom were always super close, or at least that was the mindset that I was manipulated under, was that we were really close. My mom kind of lived through me for a long time. She unfortunately had her childhood taken away from her when her mom got cancer when she was 12, and her younger sister, my aunt, was 3. My mom ended up having to stay home and missing school a lot so that she could take care of her sister while my grandmother was in chemo. And so my mom had her childhood taken away from her very early. Being her firstborn, my mom saw the opportunity to relive her childhood. When I came out, my mom kind of realized it was time to stop living through me because I was kind of developing into a human at that point. I was no longer a child and was starting to figure myself out. And so instead of being like, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to give you space to explore, it kind of exploded. My mom built a resentment for me that I didn't see until I was 15. When I was 15, my mom started drinking. And that's when things started going downhill. She could no longer hide the resentment, and so it was just in my face. I could never love you because you look like your dad. You're too gay for me. You're an embarrassment to me. Things got worse when I came out as trans. All of her friends would properly name and pronoun me, and she never would. And a lot of the times she would say that it embarrassed her when they corrected her, and that my friends telling her that I went by a different name and pronouns than she was using, really bothered her, made her feel like she failed as a parent. And so that's kind of where like the emotional abuse started, on top of when she was drunk. Things were, she broke my finger and had thrown multiple jars and things and hit me in the back of the head with candles and beer cans that were large and heavy enough when full that would put holes in the walls when she would throw them. And so I remember there was a certain time, I was about 16, and my mom got really, really drunk and got really mad at me or my sisters or one of us, and went and laid face down in the creek, and it took 3 of us to drag her out because it was a good like 8 or 9 foot slope down there, and that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you have to drag like 110 pounds of dead weight while it's fighting you, it's a lot. She ran out in the road, and there was maybe 2 or 3 cars that saw us. One called the cops. We got her back in. I had to explain to the cops that she was drunk, and they didn't really do a whole lot. They were like, whatever, don't let her back out of the house. You know, they were like, a bunch of teenagers and a drunk adult, that's safe, right? So they left us alone. All of us have PTSD to some level or another because of the events of my drunk mom. Right after, my sister moved out in February before I graduated, and I left when I graduated. She didn't come to my high school graduation, and I'm never going to be able to forgive her for that, along with all of the other stuff that she had done to me, and dead naming and misgendering me, and just being horrible. And I still talk to my mom after I graduated until September, and then in September I cut her off and basically told her that she was a piece of shit and needed to get her shit together. She pretends to be putting in an effort. She says she's putting in an effort to not dead name and misgender me, but she's never called me by the name I go by, and she doesn't call me by my pronouns. And so every time she says that, I think I build a little bit more resentment for her, because if you're trying so hard, why aren't you fucking doing it? You know, like you don't try to do things by saying you're trying. There's no effort being put in there. And I still have a lot of resentment, and I still have a lot of like bitterness to her. Bottle it all up and hide me away. Shut that door in my face, but I'm here anyway. I wrote a song to her. It's called Dear Mother, and it's this letter that I wrote her while I was sitting on my floor. And it was just me asking her, like, why she never loved me and why she just saw me as this disposable part of this game that she was playing. And, like, telling her basically that, like, she doesn't know who I am anymore, and that I used to be some shining star in her eyes, and now I'm just like this dull void of existence to her. I don't mean anything anymore. And just kind of like going off about like how much she hurt me, and she always said that I was a toll on her mental health, but I don't believe that, and 2, I think if anything, I'm the one that was victimized. Make me afraid and don't say a word. Under lock and key, never to be set free. Did you know the hurt you caused? Did you always really hate me? Why did you leave me? Why did you hurt me? Why didn't I run away? Oh, tell me. When I go back to my hometown, I always feel so at home. And when I leave, I cry every time. I'll cry the whole way home. And after 2 or 3 days of being home, I feel at home there again. And then I go to Tennessee, where I lived for a couple of years, and I feel so at home. Or I go to Logan, West Virginia, and I feel at home. And so I feel like I belong at a lot of places for a lot of different reasons. I feel like Tennessee has a lot of my teenage years. Kentucky, Pike County, Belfry specifically. I graduated high school. I was brought home from the hospital there. Logan is where I started theater, and I met some of the most amazing people that I've ever met in my entire life. And then Prestonsburg, where I live now, is I've built a community now. This is where I started my adulthood. I turned 18 in Prestonsburg. I got my first apartment in Prestonsburg. I definitely feel like I belong in a lot of places.